Star blessings, welcome back. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the Scorpio lunar eclipse that's coming up, and I will also talk a little bit about Mercury retrograde relative to where we are in the cycle at the moment. And the reason I'm doing that is because the Mercury retrograde cycle in Taurus, which started on the 21st of April and ends on the 15th of May, is taking place in between two eclipses, right? The solar eclipse that we had a couple of weeks ago at 29 degrees of Aries, square Pluto, very powerful eclipse, on an anaretic degree, as we know. The lunar eclipse that's coming up is in Scorpio. So both eclipses are ruled by Mars, right? So we have a really intense Mars, Scorpio, Pluto energy with these eclipses. And, further to that, I mean, the rest of the eclipses throughout this year, we have a couple more actually, I've written them down. We have one in Libra, and then we have another one in Taurus. So those two are ruled by Venus, and obviously I'll come back and talk about those, but it's just interesting to look at the bigger picture of how this is unfolding for 2023. And of course, in July, the moon's nodes are going to transition from the Taurus Scorpio into Aries Libra, which again is Venus Mars. And I don't really want to talk about politics. I never like to talk about politics, but I will say it is very, very interesting at the present moment, and has been for a while, and will certainly be for the rest of this year and longer. Just a lot of political issues around gender, the matter of gender and so forth. I'm sure all of you are aware there's a lot of unusual, unconventional propositions being made and laws being made, and the matters of women's rights with abortion. There's so much going on. I was reflecting on a lot of it today, and my head was going to explode. There's just, there's always just too much to cover. Once again, I do like to bring my astrology into a focal point that can help us basically work with our own self, primarily. I think that's more useful than being bombarded and taken in all these different directions with the external and apparent narratives that are flying around. Yes, they are important, but I think it always comes back to our own centeredness and the work that we can continuously do with ourselves, because at the end of the day, regardless of what happens externally, whilst it does have an impact on us and can influence our lives in different ways, for sure, it's always going to be the question of how much are we, standing in our own power, in our own truth, and how much are we working consciously through our own process of evolution. So it's very easy to get swept up in the narratives that, that flow through this external reality. But I think it's always important to come back to, well, where am I placed at the moment in my life with my development, my growth, my current circumstances? What am I clearing out? What am I trying to work on, and so forth, right? And Mercury, well, let's just talk about Mercury very quickly. Mercury being retrograde in Taurus, it's a really interesting process with any retrograde cycle, but Mercury's cycle being retrograde in Taurus is very interesting because it was, let me just double check that. I just had a thought, and I just want to be completely sure that my thought was accurate, because I've been researching a few different things this morning, and so I've got a whole bunch of data in my brain. And yes, it was. So Mercury was conjunct Uranus, right, when it stationed retrograde. That's really what I wanted to clarify in my own mind. And that's super, super important, because when you think about a retrograde cycle, it has the leading up to the planet slowing down, right, which is the process of it becoming stationary, right, and then changing directions, right? So that slowing down motion when a planet is stationary, there's a very powerful energy in that portal, in that space. It might not be known to us on a conscious level, and especially with Mercury, because we are talking about processes of our psyche, our mind, our linear mind, the information that we process and absorb, the data that we've collected, and how we are sorting through that, and then how that informs our perspective of reality, right? So there's a slowing down of the planet because it's going to become stationary and then change directions, in this case retrograde, right? So we have the slowing down process. Something very important is happening there. We have the change of direction, retrograde, and so for the first, well, Mercury retrograde is usually about 21 days thereabouts. So that 21-day period, say 3 weeks, we can break that down into 2 different segments, if you like. We can even say 4 segments, really, because we can say the slowing down of Mercury to stop and change directions, that's one part. Then half of that retrograde cycle is the first part of that retrograde cycle, which is really reflecting the downtime, revision, reflecting retrospective period. It's an inner period, right? The retrograde cycle generally is always reflecting an inward process that's going on. So with the first half of the cycle, we are mulling over a number of different things, right? We are rethinking a lot of different things. And because it is in Taurus, then obviously you need to look at where Mercury is traveling through your Taurus house in your birth chart, right? Further to that, you would also look at the other 2 earth signs, right? You would look at Capricorn and Virgo, right? So the trigon, or the trinity, as it were, of the earth signs, because Mercury is going to have an influence on all 3 houses. And to bring it down to something even more specific, it's got to do with our earthly connection, our earthly relationship to life, right? To the body, the physicality of everything, because that's what earth speaks to. So it is those aspects of life, which are huge aspects, because we are physical beings as much as we are spiritual beings, right? But the physicality of this existence is the one that we see immediately, right? And feel with our 5 senses, as it were, right? So the earthly field is going through a considerable change within our own mind at the moment. So that first half of the retrograde cycle, it is a time where we are processing a lot. And because it involves the psyche, mind, the data, the information, the ideas, the thinking, the perceptions, personal opinions, and so forth, that process of Mercury retrograde, which is pulling us in, right, to slow down. The reason that's happening, right, is because the unconscious mind, right, which we are not working with on a conscious level, is very fertile. It's very powerful at this retrograde period, particularly the first half of the cycle, because it's kind of like if you don't go to sleep, right, for 3 days, usually what can happen to most of us is our mind can feel really scrambled, right? Really, we can feel delusional. We can feel like confusion, a number of different things. So we obviously need sleep. We need rest, right? And it is during that sleep and rest time that the unconscious is working in a very powerful way. So it's a little bit like that Mercury going retrograde in that first half of the cycle it's kind of like the unconscious is meeting the conscious, and there's something that's working there, working out for us, right? Because we need to tap into our own unconscious to resolve certain things, to find answers to certain things, to discover new things as well. And then the second half of the cycle is perhaps the part of the cycle where we might actually begin to start to take some action, right? And in that second half of the cycle is where Mercury reaches its, it starts to get closer to the sun, right? So it forms that Cazimi conjunction, right? Which is on the 1st of May, right? So that's only a few days away now. And when that conjunction occurs between the sun and Mercury, that's a new portal that opens. That's like a resetting of everything that we have been processing, right, during that retrograde cycle. And there are new seeds that are planted, right? And again, we can't see exactly what the outcome is going to be, but there is this sense of new energy coming through, new light coming through. And then, throughout the rest of the cycle, and perhaps when Mercury stations direct, that's when we can really get going with everything that we've been sorting through and processing on the interior, on the inner landscape. And because Uranus is involved here, because Uranus is a conjunction to Mercury when Mercury went retrograde, we're talking about two planets that have to do with our mind. In evolutionary astrology, Uranus corresponds to long-term memory, and Mercury corresponds to short-term memory, the linear mind, the everyday mind that we use to make sense of things, to connect the dots and so forth. Now, there's a strong Prometheus energy, right? Prometheus is another name for Uranus, although there are different stories and mythologies, particularly when you're going to the Greek and the Roman schools of thought or schools of mythology and so forth, you get different variations of the same god, such as Venus and Aphrodite, for example, right? In any case, Prometheus was the god that spoke to foresight, like having, vision, right? Visionary god. And he had a brother called Epimetheus, right? Which means the reverse of that, the opposite to that. So Epimetheus acted impulsively and didn't think before he acted on things. And so those energies are very strong in the Mercury retrograde cycle. You have those characters coming in at different parts of the Mercury retrograde cycle. And because Uranus is conjunct Mercury during this cycle, there's tremendous advantage for us here to really capture very specific foresight and visions in the things that we are actually revisioning, reflecting on, the retrospective position we are taking relative to the Earth trigon, the 3 Earth signs, or the 3 Earth houses in our birth chart. So, and again, with Uranus, Prometheus, there's always the potential for sudden revelations, revolutions, mental insights, powerful intuitions that can come through. And because this conjunction occurred when Mercury went retrograde, and I've just explained very briefly, the journey of that retrograde cycle, being broken up into different parts in terms of the initial stage and then the other half of the cycle, the initial stage being where we might lay low, contemplate, and not really make any huge decisions. We might make huge decisions, but it is probably more fruitful for us to sit on those decisions, the changing of our mind on something, or the decision of something in particular, right? We may come to that awareness in the first part of the cycle. That's possible as well, but it would be better to sit with that, let it simmer, let it process, allow it to assimilate, right, with the unconscious component, so that when the retrograde cycle of Mercury comes to an end, as it were, and before that we have the Sun-Mercury conjunction, Cazimi, which plants new seeds, right, new seeds of understanding in what we are doing with our life, and the earth houses particularly, so the earth aspects of our life, which is, you know, such a big portion of our existence as physical beings, right? Uranus can really aid in foresight, right? In having very strong intuition into seeing into the future, as it were, right? Our own future. And that's what we really should be interested in, because primarily, at least to begin with, because if we're just paying attention, as I said, to the chaos, right, the madness and everything that's going on out there, we just lose our own centeredness. It's very, very easy to do, particularly in this technological age that we are living in, that just keeps taking us further and further away from our own centeredness, right? So this Mercury retrograde, with these layers to it, and particularly with the conjunction to Uranus, Prometheus, the one who had the foresight and the vision, is happening in between eclipses, right? And eclipses are the portals that open a pathway into our soul's dimension, into our soul's direction, into our soul's desires, that the conscious personality component of who we are doesn't really know how to do that, right? So there's a sense of destiny, there's a sense of deeper intention from the soul's position when these eclipses occur. And it's not to say that every single eclipse, you know, is going to change everybody's life, right? Because if that were true, then our lives would be changed every single year quite dramatically, and we'd all probably be completely insane, right? So that doesn't happen, and thank God for that, because if it did, as I said, you know, we'd all be, probably just completely insane. So then the question becomes, well, do I pay attention to an eclipse that comes along? Yeah, I think it's worth being aware of it. I don't think we need to necessarily worry and obsess about it every time it's coming along. I think it's just great to have an awareness of it. Obviously, if it's connecting to really significant things in your chart, especially personal planets, and especially the angles of the chart, the nodes as well, then, you know, you probably would pay more attention, but you wouldn't stop there. You would see, okay, well, this eclipse is forming a conjunction to my sun. So, for example, the solar eclipse that we had just on my birthday, actually, it was, which was at 29 Aries, was basically conjunct my sun and Mercury. Right now, I'm still here, I'm still alive, I'm still breathing. My world hasn't spun completely upside down, although who knows, anything can happen, right? I'm open to all possibilities. But the point is, a lot of people who had that 29 Aries degree eclipse, you know, hitting something off in their chart, they might have thought, oh my God, you know, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my life? Is it going to be a disaster? Well, you know, for some people it can be a disaster. You know, it's not necessarily easy to predict with eclipses in the form of saying in no uncertain terms, this is exactly what's going to happen to you. If someone said that, I'd have a big question mark around that delivery of content that someone gives you. So where was I? Yeah, so the Mercury is in between these energies, these eclipses. That's right. And I was talking about, you know, these eclipses being portals that can change, the direction of our life. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can absolutely happen. Also, the Aries solar eclipse was opposite the Libra and Venus star point that just transitioned in October last year. So that's important too. And I think, from bigger picture and let's say political issues and so forth, it feels to me that these eclipses, because there's a strong Mars, Venus, Aries, Libra, Scorpio, Pluto energy involved really for all of 2023, it's pretty evident that it's activating the issues in our society around ideologies and beliefs and laws and what people believe should be or shouldn't be the case around this matter of gender, right? It's just everywhere, right? It's exploding on every platform, and there's a clear division, right? Now, I'm not here to talk about that specifically or which side I take. I have some concerns around that, around some of the issues around that, not the entirety. I do believe that every person should have the right to express who they feel they are. But on the other hand, I do also feel when it comes to children, that children need to be protected, and they need to reach a level of maturity and adulthood when it comes to making irreversible, life-changing decisions. That's just my opinion. Many of you may disagree. That's okay. Many of you may agree. That's okay as well. I'm not trying to win points over it. I'm just merely expressing my perspective. I mean, look, I heard that there was a law passed in Washington, USA, and I was like, I nearly fell off my chair when I heard this. I think this is really controversial, and I don't shy away from controversial matters. Most of you would know that by now. But I feel this is a little bit too radical, which I don't mind radical behavior and radical things. But let's leave it to the adults, not the children. And so the law I'm referring to is that I heard that a law has been passed where if a parent doesn't allow the child to reverse their biological gender birth components, the child can be removed by the parents. Now, I don't know how you guys feel about that. I have some concern around that, because I don't think children are capable, that they haven't actually formed and developed yet. I mean, the brain hasn't even fully formed and developed yet, when you're a child. So there's a few concerns and a few interesting controversial issues taking place. And I bring it up simply to demonstrate that these eclipses, which are predominantly Mars, Venus, which is, as we have always referred to, the archetypes in astrology do ascribe to what we call gender, right? It's not necessarily the case that we must say, like, what gender would you ascribe to Neptune? I wouldn't really ascribe a gender to Neptune at all, because it's the ultimate source of spirit, right, which I believe has no gender. But when it comes to the understanding of masculinity and femininity, which both genders have, there's a clear distinction between a masculine energy and a feminine energy. And obviously from a physical perspective, and then we have, everything in life can be equated to either feminine or masculine, in some kind of way. So when we look at Mars, for example, we typically say, well, Mars is a masculine energy, right? It has a strong masculine component to it, right? When we look at Venus, we see Venus as the divine feminine goddess, right? It's a feminine energy, you know. But anyway, look, these are issues that I think will probably create division, conflict, debate, and so forth, right? And we'll just have to see how that plays out. Coming back to the present moment, I wrote a post yesterday just talking a little bit about Venus in Gemini, and the reason that I think that's important to just highlight just very briefly in case you didn't read the post is because Venus is in Mercury's sign and Mercury is in Venus's sign, right? So I'm just noticing that light. It's that time of the year where the light is lower, the day is smaller, and anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I feel like I can't see when that light's in my eyes. So Venus in Gemini, you know, Mercury in Taurus, they have a mutual reception. Technically, a mutual reception needs to involve a Ptolemaic aspect specifically. But in any case, they are in each other's signs. So they're kind of like, they're sharing something very closely, as it were. It's almost as powerful as a true, literal mutual reception, but not quite there. But in any case, they're talking to each other. They're like guests in each other's homes, something like that, right? So, and, you know, Venus in Gemini as well, which started off with a trine to Pluto when she first ingressed into Gemini. What else did I have to say here? That's right. The Venus-Moon conjunction that occurred a few days ago, which I saw the most magnificent pictures, and I actually witnessed the conjunction myself. We were really fortunate here to have the best weather conditions, the clearest skies, most beautiful sunsets, and, you know, it was setting on the western side, which is the side that I face at the moment where I live. So I just saw the magic of Moon Venus, which is one of my favorite conjunctions visually to see in the night sky. The other one is to see Jupiter, Venus, Moon, and you don't often see that. It's you've got to have the right conditions. They've all got to line up, etc. But it's like just it's literally, if you want to say, well, what does something spiritual feel like? I would say that. I would say when I'm looking at a Moon Venus conjunction in the sky, I feel that's a spiritual portal, you know, that's a beautiful, divine, feminine, spiritual portal. It's a moment where you don't have to think about anything, right? You just remain sort of centered and in awe of this exquisite beauty, right? But that Venus-Moon conjunction in Gemini corresponded to Venus's cycle as being the morning star, evening star, and with that, with those star points forming a conjunction to the moon throughout the month, as it were, for instance. And as she does that, she locates different chakras in the body, and this one was connected to the throat chakra, which I think is really interesting with you know, Venus being in Gemini, which is logos, speech. Throat is Taurus, right? But we use this part of the anatomy, as it were, and then this chakra, right? The energy in our Taurus, because Taurus rules the throat, that energy point there can be blocked, right? It can be heavy, you know, it can be restricted. There's a lot of different things. So I think what's been really important with this Venus in Gemini and the Moon Venus conjunction, accentuating the throat chakra region, has activated the personal opinion matter and the matter of people speaking up, right? Speaking up for themselves, speaking up on certain ideologies they have, certain beliefs, perspectives, whatever it is. It could be other things in the home, in the family, where, you know, a person has needed to speak up for themselves, right? To feel heard, for example, to feel that they have a voice, they have a say. You know, those kinds of things have been really important. And it is Venus, so it does have a lot to do with women being able to speak up. Now, it's so interesting to me that these eclipses are happening, you know, the Venus-Moon conjunction accentuating that throat chakra, Venus trine Pluto, and this massive whirlpool of it's almost like a new reality that's trying to be integrated relative to this matter of gender. I didn't want to bring it up again, but it just keeps coming up. I guess it's on my mind a lot, particularly because I have a concern for children. That's primarily why. And Gemini, whilst it is our personal opinions and what we think, it is the one archetype that has a tendency to really create division, right, and split things up. That's the problem with the personality level of Gemini. On the other hand, Venus is the esoteric ruler of Gemini. So if we were to think, reflect, feel into that portal of Venus in Gemini from that esoteric level, then we would find a path in love for all, which is very difficult to do. But I think throughout our different experiences in life and our evolutionary process and all the lessons that we have and learn and grow from, the mistakes we make and so on and so forth, there's always a teaching about love in every journey, in every lesson, in every process. Because if we can't bring love to it, then it's very difficult to let go, to forgive, to accept. With the absence of love are the other psychological components of who we are. They come through very strongly, which is anger, judgment, denial, refusal, non-acceptance, and so on and so forth. So love is always definitely the answer. And so with Venus in Gemini, from that esoteric highest level, you know, she always invites us to bring in the energy of love, right? And the more we see conflict, division, control, you know, all those sorts of things, I think those sorts of ways of being essentially come from a place of fear, right? They don't come from a place of love. Love is not synonymous with fear, you know. Love accepts and includes everything, right? So we have a choice, in other words, is what I'm getting at. We can get angry, we can react, we can do anything we want to do or think anything we want to think, right? With Venus in Gemini, we are going to be inclined to want to voice what it is we think on a particular issue, whether it's a political issue or whether it's an issue in our own personal relationships or our home life or the people that we love. Venus is always who we love and what we love. There is an importance here of being able to verbalize the power of our own voice, for sure. But I think we need to also be aware of not getting caught up in just blurting anything out because it's just there in your mind, right? That would be a tendency of Venus in Gemini. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently either, because Venus in Gemini, she's learning from an evolutionary perspective, she's learning about herself by this process of expressing all her ideas, even if it comes into conflict or opposes somebody else's perspective, because then when she hears what the other person has to say and the other person's ideas, even if it's conflicting, this is how she learns about herself. So communication is very important while Venus is in Gemini, long story short. So yeah, I would, and the sun is in Taurus, North Node is in Taurus, Vesta's in Taurus. Now that was a triple conjunction a couple of days ago, and to delineate that from an individual perspective wouldn't really work, right? We can just make a couple of comments about the significators of what those symbols mean, for sure. I think on a collective perspective, though, it would have a lot to do with money, banks, investments. And something pretty significant turning with that, that won't necessarily be easy because it's all square Pluto. Pluto in Aquarius, right? So I'd be interested to see if anybody has heard anything significant with money, investments, banking and stuff like that, because it's really an area that it's like it doesn't exist in my life at all. I have no idea about exchange, stocks, money's values on things going up and down, gold, silver, whatever. I've just never been drawn to any of that stuff, right? And many are, and again, that's neither right or wrong. It's just what we are drawn to. But I reckon because Vesta is the goddess of investment, although she's a soul goddess. She speaks to the deep soul work that we do, right? And the work we do behind the scenes. But she does also figure strongly in a chart where a person might be really connected to the world of investments in whatever form that may be. So that's why, and because it's all in the sign of money, as it were, Taurus, possessions, resources, then, it clearly does speak to resources and money and investments and things like that. Something really significant shifting there. From a personal perspective, we can relate that to our own relationship to the earth aspects of our life. That includes how we consolidate things, Taurus, We can bring in the Mercury, which is in Taurus, and how we're rethinking some of the things of our practical material world, how we are actually, what are we investing in, what are we spending, what do we need to take a step back from, rethink and so forth, classic Mercury retrograde in Taurus, of course. But don't forget to pay attention to the Virgo and Capricorn houses as well. For me, it's really interesting because this Mercury is in my fourth, which is a water house, and it rules my Capricorn and Virgo are in houses that have nothing to do with the material plane. They're houses connected to spirit, soul, the esoteric, things like that. So, and the fourth house is it is my inner life, my soul life, and it is my physical home as well. So for the last few days, I had a minor incident where I injured my ribs, actually. And I was in a lot of pain for quite a few days there, and I just had to completely surrender and lay low. And I fell, and when I fell, Saturn was in the fourth house of the chart for the moment. Saturn rules things that fall, including objects and or people, right? That's why people who are elderly, one of the most common things that happens to them is they fall and they break, their hip, and it's just the most common thing, right? Because Saturn rules gravity, and so anyway, that's another story. But what was I getting at? I was trying to get at, with this Mercury retrograde for me, I had to I literally just had to stop everything because it was hurting to even breathe. And when I coughed, oh, forget about it. That was like, just forget about the pain that was there. So it just really put me into a still, quiet zone, which I really appreciated, because prior to that, I had a 2-week period where I had a lot going on, more from an external level, social external level, and also some Greek Easter traditional rituals and so on and so forth. And I really needed rest, actually. I was so exhausted, right? Just so exhausted. And that, it's like that fall that happened forced me to stand still and just do nothing for days. And I've recovered now. My ribs are still tender, but fortunately I didn't break them or fracture them or anything like that, right? But that time out, see, it's interesting, because when you're on the go, and there's a lot going on internally, something usually, and I've got transiting Mars moving through my 6th house, right? Mars can be accidents, of course, as Uranus can. And the 6th house, of course, is my health, right? So, something happened to my health. It was through an accident that forced me to just completely stop everything. And that was a gift. Even though it was a painful gift, it was a gift, because it enabled me to just totally rest, which is what I absolutely needed from that physical health level. But it also gave me the opportunity to process a lot of things from a deep soul, psychological, spiritual level, very deep material. Like I could feel it inside me, just moving through me. I couldn't put words to it. If somebody asked me at that time, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? I would not be able to put words to it. It was just so intense and so deep. And it's like I was mute for a few days. But I go through those sorts of cycles because I've got, Venus in Pisces, I've got placements in water houses, I've got some things in my chart that really take me inwardly a lot, right? And as I'm getting older as well, I feel even more of a calling to just withdraw from that external world, right? Obviously, in my teens and 20s, it was still there, that part of me that just needed to tune out and just withdraw from the world. But I was very extroverted as well in a lot of ways. So, gee, I divulged quite a bit about myself there. I don't really like to do that. But anyway, I think what I'm trying to say fundamentally is that the Mercury retrograde in between eclipses is opening up deep aspects of our psyche, right? Deep aspects of the unconscious that might not necessarily be very comfortable. I think that's what I was trying to get to. And sometimes it requires something to happen to cause you to stop, because the constant engagement with the exterior of things doesn't give space for that energy to be processed and assimilated, right? And then to be sorted through, and then for a new insight to be born out of that, right? This is the Mercury retrograde happening in between eclipses. So it's a really intense kind of Mercury. And let's not forget that Taurus is right opposite Scorpio. So at the personality external level, Taurus is so relaxed, can be. So chilled out, so relaxed, just laying low, enjoying sleep, food, sex, whatever it is, just not doing too much, right? They just know how to chill out, how to relax, until their Scorpio shadow is activated by something they see, which brings up the paranoia of shit, I better be careful, because that person might do this or might take this from me or might take that from me. It's the axis that has to do with possessions and attachment, Taurus, Scorpio. So Taurus can be very relaxed and very chilled and has all those beautiful attributes because it's a Venus-ruled sign, you know, connecting to art and beauty and meditation and song, singing, musical instruments, you know, things like that for sure. But it is always opposite Scorpio. So let's move to the lunar eclipse chart before I kind of run out of time here. There's the lunar eclipse chart, which is, this one is based in Melbourne, the chart that is. So, of course, with that, never mind where the locality of where everything is placed, because this is done for Melbourne, it'll look different to your location if you are not in Melbourne. Okay, well, let me just grab a little tool here. There's the full moon, lunar eclipse. Conjunct Uranus, right? So Uranus is opposite the moon as well. There is a trine from Cancer. Mercury is also still conjunct the sun here. Vesta is there, of course. Now, Pluto is actually forming a square, right, to this full moon. Now, a lot of the traditionalists would say, no, that's way too far. You can't give that. You can't give that all. It's too far, and that's okay if that's the rule that people want to take. That's entirely up to you, right? In evolutionary astrology and even in Vedic astrology, you know, well, in Vedic astrology, two planets are in aspect. Two planets can be conjunct if they are 29 degrees apart. 29 degrees apart. They just need to be in the same sign. It's a conjunction. So it depends which lens you want to look through, right? Now, in this case, the square is a true T-square, true T-square by sign, right? Because Aquarius squares Scorpio, Aquarius squares Taurus. And the distance between them is, about 14.5 degrees, something like that. But in evolutionary astrology, 14, 15 degrees is allowed for conjunctions or squares. And I've followed that that way of thinking, and I think, you know, it depends on what you are looking at. You might need to make your own judgment call, but just be aware that there's a possibility. In this case, we're talking about a lunar eclipse in Scorpio, which is ruled by Pluto and Mars. And Pluto is at a, you know, critical degree, let's say 0 degrees. And it's squaring the sun and the moon. And Pluto recently ingressed into Aquarius. So putting all that together, I would have to say that, you know, Pluto's presence is powerful with this lunar eclipse. I wouldn't discount it just because of the distance. So if that's true, which I think it is, then, you know, we're talking about a very emotional, very deep feeling lunar eclipse that is following a solar eclipse that happened 2 weeks prior to this. You know, so solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, right? I mean, the difference being that a solar eclipse is a new moon, right? And a lunar eclipse is a full moon. But we can have a new moon without it being a solar eclipse, and we can have a full moon without it being a lunar eclipse. What is the difference? Well, when eclipses are present, which involves the nodes, then the energies are much more potent, typically. So we have a solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse, with Pluto there, squaring the lunar eclipse at least. Well, actually, it was, yes, thank you. It was square the solar eclipse as well. So we've got the two first eclipses of 2023, both squared by Pluto. You would think that that's going to be quite dramatic, right? And very, very intense. Now, the solar eclipse, Bernadette Brady referred to it as being a family of eclipses that corresponds to Venus, Mars, Pluto energies. There was a lot of issues there, or themes rather, around creativity, giving birth to creative things, new creative things, and very deep passions being evoked, some of which could be from the past, some could be totally new. But it had a Venus, Mars, Pluto energy to it, right? The solar eclipse we just had. And it was square Pluto. And now this lunar eclipse in Scorpio, ruled by Mars and Pluto, being squared by Pluto. And we're only going to be what? That's the 6th of May. So that's the 5th month of 2023. We're not even halfway through the year yet, right? It's a pretty dramatic, intense energy propelling us into 2023, which clearly is bringing up a lot of, well, the solar eclipse, anaretic degree 29 of Aries, definitely something big finishing there. As I mentioned in one of my posts, it would be very crucial to go back to around, I think it was 2005, 2006, when that 29 degrees of Aries eclipse last occurred at a different degree, but it's the same family. And for those of you that are old enough, it would be worth tracking that, because it's not going to be the same experience, because 19 years ago life was different, you are different, your life is different, right? So different contextual things will come up, as it were, but the theme of that energy is still there. It's the same thing. It doesn't change. It will not change until that eclipse dies out, which is, I think, hundreds of years away still. These eclipse families last for about 1,300 years, 1,400 years, some 1,100 years. So they last a really long time. So, there's material from our past lives that can come in as well, clearly, right? If you believe in reincarnation. And if you don't, that's your choice, but God, you're missing out on so much from the point of view of understanding the chart if you don't open yourself up to that possibility, at least. So I think there's a really strong emotional intensity that will be evoked with this lunar eclipse, for sure. And it will correspond to the solar eclipse that began 2 weeks ago. It will have, because this is the full moon. That's what this is. It's a lunar eclipse, but it's a full moon, right? The full moon had to start somewhere. Where did it start? It started at the solar eclipse, which is a new moon. So it's the same cycle, as it were, except they're both eclipses. So there is something quite profound that I feel is really coming to an end here. And it's a very intense experience, because the full moon lunar eclipse is in Scorpio. So there might be a need to really withdraw and lay low, and go into those deeper components of your own soul and psyche. And with the Mercury, because look, Mercury is still retrograde here, right? So there's very deep processes going on here. And remember, when Mercury is retrograde, it takes us in. Scorpio, moon, lunar, also takes us in. So it's probably not, I wouldn't say, during a Scorpio lunar eclipse, go out there and, bang your drum to your beat and, make a lot of noise. I would say, how about just chilling out, taking some time out, resting, reflecting, allowing yourself to kind of process and assimilate the energies of what they are trying to bring to you, and how that might make a significant change for you moving forward. Because if we try to deny and suppress the energies that are trying to come through, as it were, the way we typically do that is by keeping busy, right? And doing this, doing that, just nonstop, busy, 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 busy. And that would be Venus in Gemini. She's like a little, little butterfly, little busy bee butterfly, swirling around everywhere, jumping from this flower to that flower and talking to this person, talking to that person, doing this, doing that, yada, yada, yada. So that's kind of there as a theme as well. But I think, when you're talking about days before the eclipse, on the eclipse date, and perhaps a couple of days post the eclipse, so for a few days around that zone there, just maybe lay low. Allow yourself to feel what's coming up. It's, it's going to have a dark quality to it, depending on how much dark stuff you are completely oblivious to within yourself as well. Because the moon takes us in, it's feminine. Scorpio also takes us in. Pluto's squaring it all. Poor Taurus down here just wants to chill out and have a bottle of wine and just relax. But the opposition of the moon in Scorpio is not going to allow that to happen. It's got to bring up content and material and deep feelings that could be obsessive feelings, really intense feelings, unresolved feelings, the death of feelings towards something. It has to come through in some kind of way. Now, for somebody where it might not be so intense, it's just a great opportunity to go through an emotional washing, an emotional clearing, right? But I'm pretty confident that the Pluto, which is pretty far away, but it is forming a square, and look at how close it is squaring the nodes, right? Pluto's 0 degrees and 21 minutes. The nodes are 4 degrees and 3 minutes. And the nodes are the reason, well, the position of the nodes and the position of the sun and moon is the reason we are having a lunar eclipse. So how could you discount Pluto's presence and energy when it's so close to squaring the nodes relative to an eclipse? That's why I'm saying I think Pluto's got a really powerful point here, and it's going to be the death and ending of certain things, and therefore the transformation of things as well. Every death is followed by a birth. But emotional deaths, which can connect to so many different things, are typically really intense portals to walk through, to assimilate. And, depends who you are and what's going on and whether you want to do that or not. Some people will just numb it right down by either keeping really busy or substances or whatever it is. But the energy's got to have an outlet. It's got to come out somehow. So this is why, the understanding of these teachings, the understanding of the stars, cosmos, astrology, etc., prepares us. And it also prepares us to stay in alignment with the script, our own script, that is. Doesn't matter what's going on out there. Are you in line with your own script? That's the most important thing. So this is an emotional, cathartic, intense lunar eclipse that's going to be pretty heavy, pretty dark in certain ways. Collectively, I'd imagine some pretty not so nice things will come up out of this for sure. But relative to who you are and what's going on for you, you can use this to put your feelings and emotions in the deepest cleansing portal. It could just bring up, a whole bunch of obsessive feelings and paranoias for some people. It can bring up a lot of different content. It's just about understanding the archetype. Scorpio, which does bring up, a lot of matters around fear as well. Fear of not being in control. Not in control of my feelings, not in control of myself, not in control of my life, not in control of that person, not in control of that situation. It can bring up all that stuff. And if it does, you have a choice to recognize what needs to be tended to here. We always have a choice. That's why there's a thing called free will. The choice primarily, I think, is based on how we respond to what arises, what apparently arises. You can have two people facing the exact same situation, and you can have one person being completely aware, noticing, observing, absorbing, and then you can have another at the same situation and being completely unaware, completely reactive, completely irresponsible, completely projecting the exact same situation, just two different people approaching it from a different place. That's why we always have a choice in how we reply, respond, or whether we want to react, right? But lunar energy, lunar eclipse, Scorpio, Pluto, it is about the deeper landscape of the soul, the desires of the soul, and just simply what are you ready to allow to completely just be finished and start with the new. Because when that Mercury goes stationary direct, you're going to be ready to act on a lot of this stuff as well. A lot of what the emotional stuff that has come up, the deep, complex, let's say, unconscious material that could feel very confusing because you're not really sure where it's going, or you're not really sure what approach to take. Well, when Mercury goes direct, you will be. So this lunar eclipse is happening while Mercury is still retrograde. Another reason why just creating a space for yourself to, how can I put it? Creating a space, a container for the feelings that do come up, as opposed to pushing them down, ignoring them, judging them, reacting, projecting. Two choices: reflect, chill out, absorb, assimilate, process, feel, or do the opposite. It's up to us every time, right? So, and also, given that Uranus is here with the sun, conjunct the sun, therefore opposite the moon, lunar eclipse, there will be, potentially sudden, could be sudden endings of certain things, or just unexpected things can come up during this, including within our own self. That could be very uncomfortable if we're just trying to contain it all and control it all. Because remember, Uranus is always seeking to set us free, as it were. It's an archetype that corresponds to being so authentic and integrated that authenticity and integration translates into you being free. And that's what Uranus is always trying to activate within us, as it were. So when we're not ready for Uranus, it can come through as disruption, which can be very uncomfortable and very unexpected and sudden. And it can also be at the same time the very thing we need to liberate ourselves from something, a person, situation, a thing, whatever it is. You can't predict with Uranus, because Uranus corresponds to the unpredictable. But you can have a sense of the energy, right? Gauge the energy, kind of understand and be prepared that there could be something really out of the blue that happens through this lunar eclipse that I just wasn't prepared for. So to be more specific, you know, we need to look at our own chart. I'm just speaking generally, right? What else was there? I'm really curious about Venus square Neptune square Ceres, so a T-square. I'll be honest, that's not an easy configuration. And Ceres, in my experience, over so many years of looking at the stars and charts, when Ceres comes up, there's a loss. So I heard, and this is, in fact, this is the most mind-boggling thing I've heard in possibly my entire life. That's how I feel. I heard this today. The word woman has been removed from the dictionary. Now, if you are a woman, I think something inside you probably just jolted if you hadn't heard that before, I would think. So I'll leave that for you to contemplate and dwell upon if you so wish. But I'm seeing this, remember I said Ceres is about loss, Venus is women, and Neptune is confusion, disillusionment, deception, dishonesty, glamorizing, fabricating, just creating things through illusion at the personality level. I mean, at the highest level, Neptune, of course, is the spirit, divine source, creation to all things. But when you're talking about most of humanity operating up to the bounds of Saturn, which is very much an external, personality-orientated life. My name is da-da-da, I'm this age, I have this, I have that, I do this, I do that. Identity, right? So, yes, I think I think this is a pretty big issue. Yeah, that's happened. I think it is. I don't even know. I haven't even processed it yet. I'm just like, I just heard it, and I'm still kind of like, what? Really? Then I would say you need to take the word man out of dictionary as well. Right? You can't just remove one and have the other. These are the weird things that are coming up in these current times, and we're going to see a lot more. But I've still got hope from the Libra and Venus star point, because it only just started in October. It's going to be there for 100 years, coming out of being in Scorpio for over 100 years. So all the dark Scorpio stuff that's been going on the planet for the last 100 years, let's say, it's been going on much longer than that, but just relative to one Venus star point. There's 5 of them, but we're just talking about one right now. The Libran Venus star point, it's Libra. It has to restore justice and balance, and she will. But she's only just started that journey, so we're not going to see it tomorrow. So, and, you know, the Aries one, the Aries Venus star point on the wheel down the track about, what is it about? I've just forgotten what year it is. It's quite a few years away, but that changes from Aries to Pisces. So there is hope with those Venus star point transitions. They are very powerful for collective shifts and trends that occur. But we need to also apply them into the context of where we are historically as well. The world is different today to what it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago or even 10 years ago for that matter. So it's always relative to the context of what's appearing at any given moment, right? But once again, you know, that's bigger picture content, as it were, or narratives or possibilities. I always feel that coming back to my own center and observing and connecting with and being aware of my own self, this person I identify with, this person that I am, which is just one component of me. It's the deeper soul layers that always call me. That's what I've always been drawn to since I was born. So I'm always kind of introspective and reflecting, and there's, you know, and you water signs out there will relate to this. It's for better or for worse, which is the case with every element. But with water, there is this experience of reality that happens largely within. That's because water takes us in and down. Fire and air take us up and out. Water and earth actually take us in and down. So the water always invites us to the expressions of the soul. That's why lunar eclipses, which are very watery, feminine energies, you know, take us within, which does touch on that landscape of our emotions and feelings. It's feminine, water, nurture, inner, right? Okay, so yeah, I was just thinking about the T-square there, which, you know, on a collective scale, I think it's going to bring up something pretty significant about women. And I know there are very significant issues already when it comes to women's rights and women's things, right? We all know, I'm not going to go into the specifics. There are many other astrologers that like to focus on all that with charts and things like that. And I think it's great because then for those of you that are interested in that can check out their podcasts, whatever, right? I once again, like I said at the beginning, I prefer to work on the evolution of the soul. But this worries me, this little combination here. It doesn't look very good. Okay. Was there anything else? I think I've been talking for quite a while today. That's Venus in Gemini, eh? Yeah. I think that's it, guys. I'm going to wrap it up and I'll see you soon. Hopefully today's offerings have given you some things to consider and work with. I'll see you soon. Much love and star blessings.